Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Welcome to our September webinar, How to Work with Artists to Increase Engagement in Your Science. In case you are less familiar with us, the work that we do at the Alda Center is about empowering scientists, medical professionals, and researchers to communicate their work clearly and vividly to all audiences. Today we are excited to partner with Lifeology to bring you this webinar. I will let today's speakers fully introduce themselves, but they include Gaius J. Augustus, scientist and artist, Paige Jarrow, Director of Science Communication at Lifeology, Dorian Elgara, Head of Design at Lifeology, and Elaine Elgara, Communications Manager at Lifeology. Please feel free to answer or ask any questions in the chat, and we will try to get as many as possible in today's session. But with that, I'm going to hand it off to Gaius.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So here we are. So really what I'm going to cover is just kind of the basic points about how to work with and find artists to help to translate scientific information. And I just wanted to mention that I'm not a Lifeology employee, but I have been hired to write courses and illustrate courses with them before. So I know these people, they're great, but I'm not paid every day by them. So just a little introduction about me. We'll introduce everyone else in a minute, but I just wanted to give you a general idea of who I am before I get started. So I started out as an artist. I went to an artist high school. I continued to art university, and I really focused a lot of my energy on creating comics and video production and animation. And I went back to school after that for science for various reasons, got my bachelor's in integrative studies, focusing on chemistry and biology. And actually last year I finished my PhD in cancer biology. And it was finishing that up when I realized that going pure science also wasn't quite right for me. And so I started thinking a lot about how to mix the two. And so I started doing a lot of science art. So I want to mention just how science art really can help and why science art is such a cool field for me to be in, but also why I feel it's so important for the science world and for science communication. So this graphic is by Echo Rivera, who's also an artist, and she does a lot of PowerPoint design. And I think she uh, said it very well that you're really talking about science artists as subject matter experts, and their expertise is in visualizing that scientific information, doing it creatively, and helping to make an impact. So I'm going to be sending out a handout, or you might see it from Lifeology, and that handout will have a blog post that has a lot more information about the ways that that happens. But just a couple things that are in this blog post are things like attracting funding, becoming a better communicator, getting public attention for your work. If you're also a teacher, enhancing learning, as well as pushing your own research forward. And science art can help with all of those things. And so what I would focus on for the rest of this is really the core thing that I hope you're all here for. And one of the blog posts that Lifeology has done is one called How to Work with Artists. And what they did was really ask a bunch of science artists a bunch of questions and then compiled a list of tips from that. And so I'm just going to go through those tips. Again, these will be in the handout, and there will be a link to the blog post so that you can actually get to that post. But I just wanted to quickly go through these things so that you can get an idea of the kind of high points. So as this is going on, feel free to go ahead and put questions in the Q&A, and then we'll get to them once I'm done. So one of the first tips that I thought was really important, and I'm really glad that all of these are in the post, but was this idea of doing research. So if you're a scientist, hopefully you're very used to doing research, and doing science art is no different. And that comes in multiple ways. First of all, doing some research on who you want to work with. I always talk about the fact when I'm trying to help people understand which artist to choose, of the idea that when we're in the lab and we want to get a reagent, sometimes the same reagent is there among different different vendors, and we typically choose the one that's least expensive but doesn't have questionable quality. Science art is not that way. Science art, you'll find a broad range of pricing, a broad range of art styles, and really what it's about is finding someone who fits all of those things for you. And so it's really important that you research artists, you do some research on your own about budgets, and we'll get to that in a minute, but really taking the time to educate yourself as much as you can on the process and things like that. And I'll give you some ways to do that. But this is just really important because so often clients come to me um, and kind of drop everything on me as far as educating them when some of this stuff can really be thought about beforehand. And like I said, budgets are really important. It's really important to have budgets beforehand. Typically, the first question that comes out of people's mouths when I have consultations is, I don't know how much to pay because I always ask first, what's your budget? The A couple reasons why budgets are really important to have, especially I would say a range, a lower limit and a high limit. I find that most people have a maximum limit that they're willing to spend, but they're shy about sharing it, and you should not be. Let us know, and we will work with that, as well as the low point. A lot of science artists will give you, if you give them a range, will give you a couple different options within that range, and then you can choose what works best for you. But it really is important to have it beforehand and bringing it to your first meetings with your science artist. And I mentioned talking to your science artist, but it's really important to do that early. Again, typically when I have a consultation, people are pretty late in the process, and there's really no time to be too early. Once you've done that research, go ahead and contact a science artist. That might be before you submit your manuscript, but it could be really early in the process before you've collected your data, before you've applied for grant funding. And one of the reasons this is really helpful is because science artists can actually help you to shape that process. And the earlier you bring the artist into the conversation, the more help that they can give you. Again, these are subject matter experts, right? So bringing them in early can help to define how you move forward with the science art project. I also think it's really important to give the science artist some ideas of what you want. Um, Instead of just saying, oh, do whatever, or I don't know. If you have an idea in your head, or a lot of times I work with people and they already have tried to create something. And I always ask them for to send me that, and a lot of times people are shy about it. But what it does is it gives me an idea of where you want to go, so that I can make sure that I'm fulfilling that. Sometimes, well, one of the reasons science art is great is because it uses visuals, right? And so sometimes words don't quite do it. So having that sketch is really fantastic and really, really helps us to make sure that we're on the same page as you. And I want to encourage you that if you have questions to ask. There have been a lot of times that I've worked with people and it really gets towards the end and all of a sudden they have a lot of concerns. Um, and I really wish that they had brought those up early. As soon as you have concerns, if you're really not understanding how the process is working, um, or you have any thoughts along the way, feel free to ask those. That's really important for us. Sometimes just the questions you ask actually can change the way that we view the art project. And there have been several times that I've been asked a question that seemed non sequitur to the scientist, but to me, as the artist, it was like, oh, I should really change directions because I think this might be better for what they're looking for based on what they've asked. So most artists along the way, they will send you works in progress, or they'll send you like sketches or things like that. And one of the things we always ask is for people to look it over, our clients to look it over and give us some input. And I really just encourage you to look over it thoroughly. Again, if you have concerns, note those down. If you like something, note that as well. And those, because those reviews really give us the important information. And just like peer review, when we get information back from our reviewers, except for reviewer 3, we really can be able to integrate that into our work and allow us to, it helps the scientific process when we get this peer review. And the same is true for science art. When we get feedback, that allows us to create a better product. And what we really want in the end is to create something that you will love. But at the same time, I also want to encourage you to keep an open mind. Artist's job is really, again, as that subject matter expert, sometimes to just push you a little bit. And sometimes that means pushing you a little outside of your comfort zone. So you need to voice those concerns and let the artist know when you have worries, so that we know. But also, I think it's important to really keep your mind open and understand that the artist has that expertise and they're using that to help. So there's a balance there, and that balance comes with working with artists more often. But I just want to put that out there as a really important point. And I'm really glad that the other science artists that were in this Q&A brought this up. And I know I've already talked about budgets, but I really need to make sure that this is clear, that any creative work that you are working on with any any creator, you really should pay them. Um, Again, we're talking about subject matter experts here. I typically say that this is really like hiring a postdoc in your lab. You're getting people in who have subject matter expertise, who you want to do expert work for you, and um, that means that you should pay them. And again, there's a lot of questions about how much to pay. I'm going to tell you there are no standards, but and feel free to ask questions about that. We can talk more about that. But in general, I find at least once a week I'm getting asked to do work for free, and that's work that, you know, I would have to take time out of my day and take a lot of time doing my own research and doing my own um, work to figure out how to do. And it's really not fair to ask people to do all of that work for free. And I think it's also important just to note very quickly that art is more than just drawing a quick drawing. There's a lot of work that goes into even the most simple design. And so just understand that it's a long, thoughtful process, and therefore it deserves to be paid for. I also think it's important to mention that getting the art done is not all there is to it. This point was brought up in the Q&A, and I thought it was really great that even once you get that art piece, you really need a plan to help to disseminate that in the way that you want to. So if that's a grant proposal, obviously it's more straightforward because you're going to put it in the grant. But if you're really looking for outreach, um, then you really need to think about how is this going to be promoted. And those are probably questions your science artist will ask early on. Are you putting this on social media? Which platform are you putting it on? What quality will you need? And all of those things can be part of the conversation to figure out the best way to create something that meets the needs that you have. And most importantly, this should be a fun process. And I know I try to make it fun and engaging for my clients that I work with. And if you're working with someone and it's just not jiving, the earlier you say that, the better. So it really should be a fun process. I love hearing all about the science that people are doing. And I really love trying to create something that will expand that and make it more, have a bigger impact. So I want the scientists to be really excited when they see the work, and I want to be excited about the product that I'm creating. So really just think about this and try to have fun with it. So another question we get all the time is how to find artists, and I am going to be completely honest with you that this has been the hardest thing for me to figure out, because there really haven't been a lot of great platforms to make sure you're seeing a broad range of art styles and a broad range of diverse artists and things like that. Again, the things that I'm going to mention are going to be in that handout that you get. So if I'm not giving a lot of details, it's because you're going to get details that way. So these are the really main ways that I found to be really good about finding science artists. If you're looking for more of a natural style, especially if you're working in like biology, the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators has so many amazing artists and illustrators that I don't even know where to start. They have a listing on their website of artists, and they're just do amazing work. So I highly think you should consider that if that's the type of illustration that you need. Outside of that kind of illustration, it gets more tricky. I found that one of the best ways is really getting on social media. So there's a Roku account or a recurring I can't remember, but it's an account where different people every week come in and they talk about different aspects of science art, and that's the I Am SciArt Twitter account. But then there's a bunch of hashtags you can follow, and these hashtags are great for finding artists, but they're also great for answering questions. So those questions about budget, those questions about what the process is like, those questions, you can even post with the hashtag and say, hey, this is my project. I'm looking for an artist. Any suggestions? Um, and I've seen that work fantastically for a lot of people. But recently, again, I don't work for Lifeology, but one of the things I've loved with Lifeology is that I feel like it's the only place I've seen so far that's very robustly brings scientists, science communicators, and artists together. Um, and I've seen collaborations come out from there, and I've gotten to work on a lot of really cool projects. And I really encourage you to take a look at their website. They have a matchmaking tool so that you can put in your needs and get information about artists that you could work with. There's also a Slack channel. That Slack channel has everything from at being able to ask questions to also saying, hey, I have this project. I'm looking for an artist for it. So I really encourage you to check those out. Again, I think it's right now one of the best platforms to be able to do this. And with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and turn off my screen. I'm going to hand it over to Paige to introduce Lifeology and all of that stuff. And I look forward to your questions afterwards.
Awesome. Guys, that was an amazing presentation. And thank you to everyone who's dropping questions in. I see a ton of questions that are really amazing. I'm going to give a bit of an introduction to Lifeology just so you know where we're coming from. And then we'll get into a bit of a panel discussion where we'll go through and let everyone introduce themselves that's on the panel. But then we'll quickly get to some of the questions that you all have been asking. So just a bit more about Lifeology and where we're coming from, and I see this a bit in the questions. So we come from, all of us work at a company called Lifeomic. It's a health software company. So we're coming at science communication, I guess first and foremost from a tech perspective. We're building a cloud software that can help with science communication. And we've done that through creating an art forward a flashcard swiping course, essentially. So it's a technology where people can swipe through cards that include text and visuals, and it's interactive, so we're building basically a platform that people can use for a very specific type of science communication, a very specific format. So if you visit lifeology.io, you can see what that format looks like. But in addition, sort of layering onto that platform that we're building is we thought it was really important to not just build, a platform for science communication, but to make sure that it enabled collaboration between scientists and artists. Because we feel like there's a lot of tools out there where a scientist can sign up and create an infographic themselves, or sign up for Canva and create, have templates to help them create better looking presentations and things. But where a lot of that I think is missing is it asks scientists to do everything DIY and learn for themselves, and not collaborate with these subject area experts in art and storytelling. So Lifeology also is a community space. So at lifeology.io, we try to bring scientists and artists together. We have a member directory where people can sign up, and there we're just trying to facilitate scientists and artists coming together. So that could be digital artists, musicians, performance art, any style of art, and at any stage of the scientific process. We're trying to do that within the Lifeology community. So it's a little bit separate from what we're doing as a platform, where we are focused mostly on digital art and combining that with text in the form of these kind of science stories that are interactive and online, if that makes sense. And then finally, Lifeology is a service too. So if you came to us and you said, I want to, create one of your little flashcard courses, but I don't know how to work with an artist, we kind of fully coordinate to help scientists do that. Again, because we think that, as scientists, we spend a lot of time doing our research and doing very technical things. And so we think it's best to bring people in that are experts on the art and the storytelling to help make the products of science communication better instead of asking the scientists to do everything themselves. So hopefully that was, everyone, can ask questions. I now want to jump into having everyone introduce themselves on this panel, and then we'll get to some of your questions from the audience. So first, I'm just going to have everyone introduce themselves, but in a fun way of introducing how they got into science art. I would start, but I am not a science artist, nor do I have any artistic skills. So I'll skip me and let Gaius and the rest of it, and Dorian and Elaine also introduce themselves. So
I think I talked enough, so I'm going to let them take over.
Okay, I could start. Very excited to be here. Great job, guys. That was great, and thanks, Paige. My name is Dorian Algara, and I'm head of design of the Lifeology. I'm also VP of design for Lifeomic, which is the larger company that Paige had mentioned, and I'm also co-founder of Lifeology. So it's my career has spanned pretty much everything I'm to do with product design. So this is website design, actual apps, and then also illustration. My intro into art for science is pretty interesting. Is the whole reason why we co-founded Lifeology was coming into this company where science and health was the main driver, and why I was so drawn to this company, their mission. I did see that there was a gap between science and education, and me coming from a non-science background, I'm just creative. I noticed this as well. I was also noticing the cultural shift in the world where there was a lot of misinformation and noise was prevalent, especially in regards to science. So this was disheartening to me, very disturbing to me. So what we decided to do, we had the room to create Lifeology, and basically, like Paige had mentioned, we pair art with science, and it is a symbiotic relationship. I read somewhere that art and science are both human attempts at unlocking answers. I really agree with this notion, and I think that although artists and scientists obviously use different methods and tools to do their research and exploration, the innate need to share that output for the greater good is like that one common goal. We all want to just give back to the community. So for me, art and science was the perfect kind of partnership since we're trying to reach that same goal. And that's what we're all trying to do here. So that's kind of how I was introduced to art and science. And I could go on forever, but I'll kick it off to Elaine.
So hi, my name is Elaine Algara, and I am originally from Newcastle upon Tyne in England, but I now live in North Carolina. I am the Lifeology Communications Manager. I've only been in the job for about a month. Prior to that, I have a 25-year career as a visual arts teacher in the UK and in the USA. And I've always been very kind of passionate about empowering underserved population, making sure that diversity is represented, and also just to empower people with health and science literacy. So this opportunity came along to help develop and build this platform for Lifeology. And so for me, it was kind of like a no-brainer. And I love the fact that I'm a non-scientist. I'm very much a visual art person. And I just love the collaboration that's been happening. And even though I've just been in this job for like a month, I feel like I've grown so much with the amount of information that I've learned. So yeah, welcome everybody. I'm looking forward to participating today.
And guys, do you want to I don't know if you talked about how you got into science art in the first place, but.
I think I covered it in my presentation, but just as a quick refresher, I started as an artist. Somehow I made it into science, and finishing up science, I was like, I should do both. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Cool. What are the first, I'll start with maybe, a question from us that's a little bit, kind of fundamental, and then kind of switch back and forth between the questions from the audience. But I think this does address some questions that people are having. Is that like, what, when we say science art, like, what do we mean? And what role does or can art play in science communication and in science? And I'll just throw in that in answering the panel and answering this question, we do have some questions from the audience in terms of like, what is the difference between scientific illustration and more contemporary science art? That might not be, the goal of that isn't necessarily to communicate a science concept straight up. There's also medical illustration. So, I guess from our panelists, what do you think of when you think of science art?
I could start this one off.
Yeah.
All right, so this is an interesting question for me, and I do want to, before I answer, I do want to express that this is like a question when someone asks me, what is art? It's kind of a philosophical question, pretty deep. It's not, I don't think we're going to be able to, you ask 5 people, you get 5 different answers, but yeah, and especially if you're posing it to an artist. So it depends, depending on who you ask and what setting, the answers will differ. So, I mean, for example, at its simplest, if art is meant to evoke emotion and spur thought, I mean, one could say that science is art in many ways. I consider it. So it just depends on who you're asking. But for our purposes here, for this context, I mean, for me, science art is the merging of art and science to create a unified vision that helps describe a specific concept where art uses science as its inspiration, basically. That's as simple as I could put it, and it, again, I find it kind of odd trying to describe it, but it that's kind of, if I put it in the simplest terms. And I think for the work I'll talk to the work that we do at Lifeology. It's become pretty apparent that art plays an integral and important role in science communication. I mean, the basic things I could think of are associating artwork with scientific concepts can help the reader remember the concept and increase retention. And I've had some personal kind of experience with that. Art stimulates imagination, and associating with science can hopefully increase the reader's engagement in the topic. That's another thing we've been learning through our process here. And also, art, it's been known to relieve stress. I mean, I use it to relieve stress just doing the art, but looking at art also does that. And the idea is to use the art to complement what could sometimes be complex scientific information, so that information is less intimidating. So I think that's where the noise and the kind of misinformation comes from, is the intimidation factor and just not knowing. So using those two pieces is integral, and I feel that's the most important thing, is bridging those two concepts together.
And if I could just add, one more thing to that list is public trust in science. I feel like art is really good about helping people to visualize what's in scientists' head in a way that really helps that public trust. And I also want to mention one thing about what science art is not. I find that a lot of people, when they first hear about it, they're thinking either infographics or fine art. And that is not the limit to science art. Any way that you can think of art, including like performance arts and all of those types of things, they can all also be science art. So I just wanted to mention that science art doesn't have to be just fine art or just infographics.
And then I'm gonna add into it. So for me, as like an educator, like art and science, it's just like different ways of asking questions, looking at things through different lenses. And I feel like the arts brings a lot of kind of humanity to science. And I love the cross-curricular approach. And I did a lot of kind of cross-curricular work as an educator. And then just like art, to me, it's a self-expression, it's a perspective. And as a non-scientist, when I think of like science art, I think of like science and art colliding together to better communicate complex ideas, because we live in such a visual world. the fact that we process images way faster than we process text. It's just a better learning experience. So I tend to look at it from that angle.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll let those questions stand because those are all amazing. So yeah, I mean, I think everyone can see that we can define science art in so many different ways. And I think in talking to an artist, it is good to kind of keep an open mind and think about, yes, art can be used to kind of communicate your end results in a form of an infographic or scientific illustration, but opening your mind to all the different possibilities of science art, like way up to the phase of, you know, helping you get funding to doing more, you know, outreach type of engagement that doesn't have your own agenda when it comes to what this art should communicate about your science, but instead brings people in to ask their own questions. You know, this gets at, from my view, science communication that is more dialogue based and more participation based, and doesn't always necessarily have your own agenda of what should be coming across in the art.
And I just want to add something in there. Like when I'm talking about art, I'm like a visual artist, but there's a lot of things happening in the arts. So I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dr. Chris Emdin, but he has the hip hop science thing going on where they kind of make raps about science and present them. So there's a lot of different things out there that's really cool.
Oh, sorry. Awesome. Yeah, so we'll just jump into another question. I want to get to some audience questions. We'll just start with one of the ones I have up first. But this question says, with more versatile data visualization tools available to scientists, the lines between scientific figures and art is becoming more blurred. Have you had any experience merging art and data visualization?
I've done a lot of that. So one of the first things I started with when I started doing science art was infographics. And infographics are, again, one of the key things I think people think about when they think about hiring a science artist, because you do want a way to visualize your data, and maybe you want a way to visualize your data that's a little more interesting than the typical plots that we tend to use, especially when you're trying to get that data across to broader audiences than just, you know, your colleagues. So I think that that's definitely an important side of some science art. Um, I typically will push scientists to have less data in their pieces, even when I'm doing infographics, and really push them to think about what data is actually necessary. If you're talking about numbers or charts, like what's really necessary to help someone to get a thought across. And a lot of times, the things that we as scientists think are really important pieces of data, when you actually are giving that information to a person who is not data driven, it doesn't really help them to understand or help them to appreciate it. And so while I definitely think that that's important, and a lot of science artists, there's data visualization specialists as well. And there's a hashtag DataViz on Twitter if you're interested in finding more about that too. But I also encourage you to kind of think a little bit beyond data, and how you can use the data to inform a science art piece that can help with whatever your goals are for that piece.
Yeah, that's a great point, guys. And I'll add to that. Infographics is a great way. And you're right. The data is that itself is important and really great to look at. But when you collaborate with an artist, they'll bring it at a different angle and actually make it. You could tell a story if you do it really well. And
you should tell a story.
Right, exactly. And to his point, like you're right. You don't need every single piece of information. There are ways to do that, but again, I think the collaboration with an artist is key. Not only because you want it to look great and be accessible by everyone, but you know, these artists are like somebody mentioned in the chat, they're thinkers too. They'll help with the strategy, and they'll help kind of bring their angle on it that a scientist might not be thinking of. So that's a great point.
Yeah, maybe let's jump into talking about, you know, when and where to contact a science artist. And so it gets a little bit at, you know, I guess there's a little bit of an art to knowing like what you can do yourself and what you're gonna need a subject area expert for, a designer, an artist. I mean, I think a designer is always gonna be able to help you make an infographic better, but you know, can you, you know, someone asks, you know, what is the tips for a good infographic? You know, there's tons of resources out there for scientists to learn how to do better infographics, better, you know, poster presentations on all of that. But I think there is an art to knowing when do you need help outside of yourself. So maybe we could tackle that a little bit of like, you know, when and where should you approach a science artist?
Can I just start this one? Because this was in part of the questions and it's very interesting. So, you know, for me personally, if there's a scientist or someone that wants to get into art, by all means, I do encourage that. I do feel though, if you want to really use all the capabilities of what an artist could do, collaboration is always, for me, the key. I would always much rather use a collaborator, an external party, not only because you'll get their standpoint, their angle from it, but you know, artists, just as scientists, have studied that craft, and it's a very, unless you know, if a scientist was to say like, I'm interested in art, definitely there are things that they should hone in on, you know, the basic concepts of art, just as if an artist was going to go into science, there are basic things they probably have to start learning. But for me, I think if you want your science and your information to be put out there to the larger, to lay audiences or just to the general public, for me, I'd always say collaborate with an artist, and I would bring them in early and often, because like I said, they will bring a perspective, even if, because you know, the first couple of sessions, there might not be any drawing. It's just discussions. It's just talking about what you're doing, what's the goal, you know, what's the topic and what's the tone, the art style, all those things, and from that conversation, you'll start building something as you go. So for me, I'm not sure as far as like, obviously, I think the scientist and researcher can gather all the data, obviously, but if you are, the aim is to get it out to the public, I would always say, well, we're definitely going to bring in an artist. I would always encourage that. That's my standpoint.
So many other feedback. I guess, you know, if not, we could jump, that's fantastic. We could jump a little bit to like where, you know, where do you find, how do you get started in finding a science artist? We've obviously talked about some, you know, Lifeology, but there's lots of other places. I also want to bring up the idea that a lot of researchers want to work with maybe a student artist at their university, maybe someone who's local to a specific community, you know, especially like ethnic minorities. You know, how do you go about finding someone that really will bring to your project what you need and what you know, the most, I guess, expanding viewpoint?
So I run like the Lifeology social media at the moment on Instagram, and we use a lot of hashtags. So that is one way of like finding somebody in the community. But I also think it's important to look just beyond that realm of science artist as well, you know. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to say. I just got a blank mind. So if somebody can fill in, and then I'll continue in a moment.
So I just want to mention that since you need a second, that there have been lots of other people in the chat mentioning other types of art and other locations to find artists. So I encourage you to kind of scroll through the chat and see a lot of other things that I didn't even know about that are out there.
Yeah, and to add to some of it, like she mentioned Instagram. I mean, I'm just gonna, I'm sure some people know this, but I'll just put it out there from my perspective. To get a more diverse range and everything, there are communities, there are always artist communities, but the ones that stand out for me is definitely, of the social platforms, Instagram is the one that I lean towards because it's the most visual medium, and it's the one where you can really find people. The other one I would say that I put in that stands out is Behance and Procreate community. So Behance is owned by Adobe, who, if you're a digital artist, you're using either Illustrator or Procreate or one of those in between, and there are other tools, obviously, but those are kind of the big ones. Behance it's basically a portfolio community, and they're showing and telling, and their main reason is to get noticed or to put their stuff out there. So contacting them through there is great. Procreate community, there's the Procreate app, which is an iPad app, but they have an actual community where you'll see all the artists that specifically use Procreate. And then there's the older ones, but still super giant, like Dribble and DeviantArt. I'm still surprised that a lot of people don't know what Dribble is. Dribble's been around for a while, and it is a show and tell for designers, but also artists now. And again, you can freely search, peruse, and find a lot of art styles, diverse artists. And DeviantArt's been out forever. I remember from back with, I mean, years ago, and they're going strong. I think they just got bought by Wix.com, and that's a really diverse, because you got all levels too. There's not just professional level. There's like different levels. But those are just some, and I'll make sure I'll put them in the chat as well. But I'm seeing a lot of really good resources in the chat, as guys mentioned.
Yeah,
so yeah.
The other thing that we have at Lifeology is we have a Slack channel, which we've mentioned before, and we use that Slack channel to kind of bring scientists and artists together. It's kind of a meeting place. At Lifeology, we run science art challenges and enable people to like collaborate with each other. And there's people come onto that channel looking for artists for particular projects. So that's been a really good, useful tool that we have. So I can post a link to that too. I'll do that while other people are talking.
Awesome. Well, I want to get into some of the logistics, like kind of do's and don'ts when you found an artist and now you want to collaborate. But we are getting tons of questions about budget, so I do want to just address some of those. Could anyone here, I don't guess guys talked a lot about that during the presentation, but are there any other tips from Dorian and Elaine around budgeting? How do you come up with a budget? Yeah.
I mean, I think, well, Gay's hit on the bigger moral of the story is like, be prepared to pay for the artist. I think that's a big, it's just an ongoing kind of premise in freelancers world, not getting paid or doing spec work, which is work for nothing, where you're just basically, a group will decide on which piece of artwork they're going to go with, but yet all the artists have submitted this art, and who knows if they're going to get, they're not going to get paid for it. They'll only get paid if they get chosen. So it's that kind of stuff. And it's a larger kind of communal thing, where if you're not paying the artist or doing it to build their portfolio or for exposure, which is nice, but not paying for the art does kind of water down the craft itself. So that's a biggie. Budgeting, I think I'll let Gay speak to more of the details of that, but just having it in your budget to fill in for an artist to be paid, and having a contract that both parties agree to, paying on time, all the things that sound like basic necessities for a freelancer, but yet are still the number one problems, and the things that lead to kind of for artists to kind of their day-to-day struggles are these kind of things. Like, even when there is a contract and they are getting paid, not getting paid on time, not getting paid timely, and all that kind of stuff. That's where the contract really comes into effect. So even communicating with an artist and saying, what are your standards there? Paid half up front, that kind of stuff. So those things, and I don't, Gaze, if you have any other kind of tidbits for that, but I just want to stress that the pay is big.
Thank you so much. I agree. And I do want to mention some specifics, because if I were in the audience, I would be like, can you please just give me a number? I don't know what you're talking about, please. And I can't, but because it doesn't exist. But what I will say is I've talked to a lot of people about this from kind of a marketing angle, because typically, really what you're doing when you're collaborating with science communicators in general is those broader impacts. And those broader impacts mean getting out to the public, getting more funding, more public trust, all the things that Dorian mentioned earlier. And in general, those things are in a lot of ways the same as a small business. A lot of businesses have these kind of thresholds. These are percentage thresholds for how they decide how much money to put into their marketing efforts. And a lot of the people that I've talked to from like how do we bridge the gap between that kind of very business sided thing and then think about it from the side of labs is setting aside a minimum of 5% of your entire budget for science communication. And I would typically, as a starter, and then to work your way up to probably 10% and sometimes more. That doesn't mean all in one project. That could be, if you have a 5-year grant, that could be 5 different projects, or it could be more. And but it's important to set aside that budget and then decide how much you can spend. And when you start talking to artists, the reason that it's important to have that budget is you can put that out straightforward, and then they know whether or not that can even fit into their work. So for me, I have done things as little as $200, $250 for one illustration. I've also done massive projects, animation projects for departments and bigger groups that were $5,000, $10,000. And so I hope that those two numbers give you an understanding of the huge range of numbers that there are. And that's just for one artist. If you get 30 people in here, that everyone's going to have a different number. And I also want to mention that artists are always asking each other these questions too. We're all trying to figure out, number one, how much we deserve to be paid, because I will tell you, artists typically undervalue themselves and underprice themselves, including me. I get fussed out by others all the time for that. But also, we struggle to get people to pay us what we're worth. So those two things I just want to stress as far as like understanding why that budget and why deciding what you are willing to pay is so important upfront.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll add a little bit of perspective just from the, from the science, from being a scientist before, trying to get funding. Some of the things to ask yourself, obviously, like I said, art can be so many different things. It could be, like you said, it's a marketing thing. It could be an outreach thing. Maybe these things are worth different things to you, but even just thinking about it, let's say a piece of art helps your research paper get more citations. Like, how much is that worth to you? I mean, it's going to help your career, potentially, be a make or break for your career and getting tenure. I mean, these things are worth a lot. Usually, the artist is not really being compensated for what the value is to you as a scientist, just in terms of your career, but also in terms of like opening your eyes to seeing your research differently. I mean, there's like tangibles and intangibles, but I think, thinking about all of these things is helpful when you're going to pay an artist and you're thinking like, oh, $500 seems like a lot, but is it a lot when you're talking about, your career as a scientist, potentially getting more funding, and all of these things.
And one more thing, I'm sorry. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I just want to quickly remind you that art is not quickly drawing something and giving it to you. Art is a process that takes a long time, takes a lot of thought, takes a lot of research on the artist side. And so when you're thinking like, oh, just draw something, we're not doing that. Like, you may want that, but I value and I'm proud of the work that I do. And I would not give anyone something that I just was the first thing I thought of and just sketched it out and sent it. Like, even stuff that I have done in the past for free, I don't do that. So just understand that art is a process. There's a lot of expertise behind it. Like Dorian mentioned, a lot of time spent educating ourselves, but even each project in general takes time.
Yeah, I concur, and I'll add too. I know this is a sticky point and probably a point of frustration for a lot of people going into, hiring an artist, because it is all over the place. There's no standard rate. Every artist, most artists have a rate, but what I have found is most artists, you can talk to them. If you come in, like Gais had mentioned about having a budget, and saying, okay, where can you work from this? And some artists will go, no, I'm sorry, that's not within my budget. But I've seen where artists are pretty flexible. I mean, the key here is they're getting paid for their time, and you're being considerate, and there's some empathy going on. There's a collaboration and communication. But yeah, there is no standard rate. I mean, I almost equate it to like, I'm if you're getting something done, work done in your house, and you're going to like a cabinet maker, like a real cabinet maker, like you could get a quote from this guy, and he's going to quote you this much. This guy's going to be different. This person's going to be different. And it all depends on their experience, their, quality, all this kind of stuff. So artists are artisans. So it's going to be different. And finding the artist, yeah, it's going to take a little bit more time maybe, but using kind of these steps and just figuring out, and the first step, having a budget, a proper budget. And like you said, not like offhanded, not just thinking of it at the last minute, like really putting into, I love that idea, Gaius, of like, kind of budgeting it out of portion and stuff like that. That's a great kind of concept, because I don't think a lot of people do that. It's always almost like an afterthought sometimes. And that's not, again, that leads to the respect between the artist and the scientist is important too. So that coming to the table with that shows a lot to an artist, and they're willing to work with you from there.
And I'll just throw in here, I know that we have some questions about, like, it's not always individual scientists that should be the funding art. Definitely not. I think there's a lot of untapped money in science grants within your own institution. Like, I know a lot of institutions in the UK have outreach and engagement dollars within like the departments that are just reserved there. And I've talked to some researchers who say like that money goes unused, like people don't ask for it. So the best thing you can do is just like start asking around your department, ask your dean, like, is there any research dollars at your university that are dedicated to students, to professors for outreach and engagement? I mean, we could talk all day. I have a whole another session about writing art into your grants, but definitely do that, and maybe talk to artists who may have had some experience with that before. Maybe they could help you. But there's definitely a lot of ways that you could go about making sure that upfront you're saving dollars for art, so that it's not coming out of your pocket in the end.
And then also, I was just going to like kind of mention, when you've got your budget and then you're looking at your contract, make your contract in collaboration with the artist. It's really valuable there that you're discussing things like your objectives, the audience, the style, the tone, and that everybody's kind of on the same page. And given those conversations, you'll know whether or not this artist or designer, like visual designer, graphic communicator, is going to be a good match or not, so you're not wasting your time.
Awesome. That's actually a really good segue into, I know we don't have a ton of time. I think there's so many questions here. I'm like, well, I would love to curate all of your questions, and maybe we'll answer them in a blog post in the future, so they won't go to waste. But let's get a little bit into like science artist collaboration and maybe do's and don'ts there. So I think we could talk a long time about contracts and what those should look like, but maybe our panel can just go through some of their like top tips for, how do you make sure you're a scientist, you collaborate with an artist, how do you make sure that that collaboration is successful, and what are some of the steps to make sure it is?
Elaine, you want to get us started?
So I'm just kind of thinking about your scientist as kind of like your knowledge person. They know a lot about the concepts that they want to bring in, and then you bring your artist in, and they're the kind of people who are going to humanize it, who are going to enable you to kind of communicate. So in order to get there, you have to collaborate. You have to have open conversations. You have to be able to brainstorm and come up with ideas. You have to take an active part. You have to have that kind of growth mindset that they talk about. It's not just this is what I want to the artist, and then they go away and get on with it. There's a very important conversation that needs to take place at the beginning in order for the artist to kind of move forward, and in order for the scientist to kind of communicate any kind of restraints that they may have on the project, because you can be very creative with restraints. Like as an art educator, I used to give my students a lot of creative restraints. I never used to really give them a free rein, otherwise they weren't sure what they would be doing. So I think that's one great starting point. Dorian?
Now, no, I agree with you. I mean, especially on the part of the kind of creative freedom bit of that, I do agree. I find, you know, on paper, full creative freedom sounds great, but in all actuality, it's not really it's not really realistic, because you want kind of those guidelines, and that's what the scientist and researcher will give you. They'll give you those guidelines, and there is in everything I've ever worked with in product design and even illustration, guidelines have been a beautiful thing. Like that's where you innovate, because you have to be more creative. You have to figure out it's solving a problem, and that's all. You know, the designers are problem solvers, so you know, kind of figuring out how to innovate within those constraints is super important. But on the other hand, you don't want to kind of completely, you know, lock down an artist so they're working for you, not with you. So there's that happy medium of like set the guidelines and what's needed. And by the way, this is all in the collaboration part in the beginning, talking. Once that's set, give the artist that creative freedom within those guidelines, and beautiful things will start to happen, and things will start to kind of move from there. So yeah, I definitely agree. But again, these are I'm hoping like we're touching on some of these myths of like, oh, an artist just wants to do anything they want to do. That's not usually the case. Like we want to build something together. So, and you know, my own personal artwork, that's where I could go and do whatever I want to do. When I'm collaborating with a researcher or scientist or whoever, it's a unified vision, and there are guidelines, there are rules, and rules can be beautiful. There's nothing wrong with them. So don't come into it thinking you have to you know, appease an artist by like, oh, you can do whatever you want. No, by no means. Just, you know, don't be giving them direction like one way. It has to go both ways.
Maybe we can fit in one more question.
Yeah. Gosh, what should we cover? I think that something that a lot of scientists want to work with an artist, but they struggle even with like putting into words what they're looking for. So it's like I might want, you know, a more, you know, I'm thinking in my head a more abstract piece of art or something like with a particular style, but I struggle, like I don't know art language and I can't put that into wording. And then sometimes that turns into frustration because what I get back from the artist I don't like, maybe. So do you have maybe tips for that, or I don't know, just you can get specific or you can be broad, but some tips for like how do you cross those language barriers, I guess, between scientists and artists?
For me, this is where examples come in. Even when people like say, "Oh, I've seen your work, I really love it," I'll be like, "Pick out your 3 favorite pieces, and let's have a conversation about what you like about them." And then, because that gives you that starting point. Also, if you have a lot of people that I work with have seen like someone else's art piece that they really like too, and sending that to the artist. Any examples that you can give um, are helpful. But I've also had the cases where I was given lots of examples and I used those, and I almost got all the way through the project and the person was like, you know, I thought this is where I wanted to go, but it's really not where I want to go. And that's fine. You still should pay your artists for the work that they've done. I'm going to stop harping on that, but it's just really important. But it is helpful to have that. And again, this is also kind of an experience thing. The more times you work with a science artist, the more comfortable you're going to be with what you want, as well as the more comfortable you'll be with understanding the jargon and the things that you need to know. it's just like getting into a new field in science. You know, like I did my undergrad in evolutionary biology, and I went to grad school and did cancer biology, and I had no idea what the cancer biologists were talking about sometimes. But the more you do it, the more access you get to it, the more you learn. And so experience is really some of the best ways to figure that out. But also, a lot of us are writing blog posts on Lifeology. I do a bunch on my website personally, trying to help to bridge that gap a little bit, so that people can better understand those types of things to make sure that you can communicate better with the artist.
Yeah, I'll add my 2 cents on this one too. And I take this, I'll give this approach speaking to a researcher or scientist, but also to an artist. So my tact has always been, it's great when someone is really trying to express or communicate what they need, but they're having trouble. Mm-hmm. So what I always tell them is, I said, look, just tell it to me like in your language. Like sometimes even I don't understand, but from there. So in other words, like I say, don't try to think of what you think you should be saying to me. Just say it. Mm-hmm. Say it like normal, like you were talking to whoever. And from there, that can kind of like break it down, because even when I used to do freelance like design or web design, same thing. They'd go, I want it to be flashy. It's like, I don't know, like, let's break it down a little bit more. And then they would express viscerally what they wanted. And from there, I could be like, okay, so what you really want is, what your meaning is this. And from there, that's where the examples come in and go, were you trying to evoke this kind of feeling or that kind of thing? So yeah, I think it's just important to note, for the artists, scientists most likely won't, maybe have never worked with an artist before. They don't speak the language. That's all okay. Just be open to that and help them through the process.
And I just want to add one last thing in. So like as an educator, I'm used to working with something called backward design. So what we do first is we kind of look at the learning outcome, we look at the objective, and then we build around that. And you can do that with the science and the art too, like what is the main purpose of it? And then you just kind of build out from that. And that's a really useful starting point.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. And this was such a knowledgeable and helpful talk for many of us. I invite all of you to visit thealdecenter.org for further information, and definitely check out lifeology.io to learn more about their courses and connecting with scientists and artists. At the end of this webinar, you will receive a quick 6-question survey. If you could fill that out, that would be extremely helpful. Also, we want to thank the Kavli Foundation and the American Chemical Society for their generous support for making these webinars possible. And with that, you will all receive a follow-up email with Gaius's handout and other information. But otherwise, thanks and have a great rest of your day.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you all.